Webs, Part 1, Cambrian, Chapter 4. After the funeral, May and I returned home. The service had been held early, so we arrived home a little bit after 1 in the afternoon. My mind was completely fried from recent events. I sat alone in the living room and let myself start processing. My eulogy for Ben had gone undelivered. I was brimming with worry about the scorpion situation, and I just faced down the man who killed my uncle. I needed so badly to get these feelings out somehow, so I could just focus. I couldn't talk to May. I refused to burden her like that, not while she needed me to be the solid, dependable nephew. I thought of someone else I could try. Flash? We had been growing closer, and that thing yesterday with my schoolwork had been nice, but the thought of sharing my innermost thoughts with Flash Thompson made me want to scream. Cindy? I shuddered at the thought of how pathetic that would be. We still hardly knew each other. The thought of dumping all of this on the girl I was crushing on screamed of disaster to me. I didn't really have an outlet for this. Ben had been the person I told everything to. Even when I was keeping secrets from him, I'd still try and tell him honestly how I was feeling. Now he was gone, and I didn't have anywhere to put my thoughts. I glared at the coffee table and noticed a piece of paper that I had left sitting there for 2 months now. When freshman year started, I had entered this pen pal program where students struggling to make friends in their own school were partnered with a student from a different school suffering the same problem. I had been partnered with a student from a private school named Mary Jane. MJ was a theater kid who I imagined as being very awkward. At first, we'd exchanged a few letters regularly, but over time, I got busy with everything going on in my life. I hadn't had the time to write to my pen pal since before our sophomore years had begun, and now we were nearing the end of them. I'd tried to start writing to her again a few times, but with how long I'd left things, it was starting to feel weird. The paper that sat on the coffee table was one such unfinished attempt at a letter to that pen pal. I had only gotten around to Dear Mary Jane and hadn't written anything else. I decided that now is as good a time as any to begin writing. Hey MJ, how was theater camp? I know you wrapped that up ages ago by now, but I'm still curious. Sorry it's taking me so long to write back. I've been busy. I started over, striking through the text. Hey MJ, I know you've probably forgotten about this. Hopefully made some actual friends by now. But I'm, around and... Again, I started over. My uncle died almost a week ago now. I don't think I've ever felt like this before. When Behemoth attacked Times Square, I was a baby. I lost my parents, but it has never really been something that hurt me because the only family I have ever known were my aunt and uncle. Ben's gone now, and I think I finally feel like the sad kid everyone expected me to be when they came up. I stopped writing. I couldn't send this now, it was getting way too personal, but I still felt the need to finish it. I'd just write out all my angst into this letter and then toss it later. He was something else, MJ. Ben Parker would give you his coat in the cold and his umbrella in the rain. Selfless in a way I'm not. I'm not a very good nephew. I've not been a very good son. He called me that before he died, son, and it's been eating away at me. My own father died holding my hand, and just like always, his only concern, even with a bullet lodged in his chest, was how I was doing. I failed him, and he was the one comfort. I stopped, not because I was finished, but because tears were dropping from my eyes onto the paper. I laughed, because what better metaphor could there be for what I'm doing than that? The stupid, poetic irony of it all loosened some of the pain, and I wiped my eyes. This letter wasn't even that anymore. It was less letter and more an open wound. But I couldn't shut that wound by just ignoring it. Couldn't shut any wound that way. I kept writing. Comforting me. He told me something once I can't let go of, even if I wanted to. These words he'd said at dinner one night. Words I'd once ignored that have driven me out of bed every morning since he died. I think they might just be the most important words anyone can hear. With great power comes great responsibility. It's so simple, it's so common sense, but I'd missed their meaning before it was too late. Ben died attempting to stop a mugger, who I had minutes earlier had a chance to stop without putting myself at any risk, and I just chose not to. I had a responsibility to do something, and I just ran by. But it's not been all doom and gloom. It hadn't? I stopped writing, shocked by that sentiment, shocked that I really did believe that. I've been thinking more about how to live like he did. Got to see some of the lives he'd affected at the funeral, and I want that. When I'm gone, I want to be remembered the way my uncle is. I helped someone earlier today, and it felt good. Getting to see her in a better spot than she was before, because I'd done something only I could do. There's this thing going on that I might need to get involved in. The people who normally handle this sort of thing probably aren't going to do anything until after things start going bad. But I think I can do something before it gets that far. Truthfully, I'm kind of terrified, but I think I can do this. I think I can make a difference. I think I can make my uncle, proud. Thank you for this. Sincerely, Peter Parker. I set my pen down. The little thank you and the sign off were unnecessary, considering I had no intention of sending this off. I probably could have been more open as well, but writing the letter as if it was something I'd really send out let me feel like I was actually getting these feelings out in a conversation. The catharsis was relieving, and I could finally focus. Scorpion. I folded up and sat the letter down on the coffee table. I was considering keeping it just to be able to read it back over in the future. I decided to run upstairs to my room instead of making a decision about what to do with the letter right now. Dennis Carradine had made it sound like Scorpion would be striking on Fisk any minute, any day now. I didn't have any love for this supposed crime lord, but I wasn't about to let people die so that I could find Scorpion just because they were criminals. I logged onto my computer and navigated to the PHO page for the teeth. From there, I pulled up the subpage for Scorpion. I needed to have some idea of what I was going up against, and the guy had had enough public incidents that his page was probably somewhat informative. Let's see. When the man had gone to trial and received a sentence to the birdcage, his name had become public record. Mac Gargan. What can you do that got Dennis so riled up? I read through the page and gulped at what I saw. Mac Gargan was one of those capes whose powers blended and skirted around the classifications. He could form a breaker state around himself made of a sleek, otherworldly chitin. In the blurry images on the site, it looked matte and sort of reminded me of metal. His breaker form looked like a massive scorpion, 7 to 9 feet tall maybe. They'd given him a changer rating because it looked so different from his normal body. Brute Breaker 8, Changer 2. That 8 was really high for a brute. It's a good thing they caught him the way they did the first time. There were also some things about his powers taking a while to be turned on, and that once it was, it took just as long to turn off. The non-power parts of the wiki were where the really upsetting stuff was. Scorpion was one of Butcher 13's right hands, and had given the group the power they needed to establish a more full-time residence in the city. Before he joined 4 years ago, they had moved back and forth between here and Boston, never sticking anywhere too long. This is all to say that his wiki contained images and stories of violence that match with what expectations one might have for someone powerful enough to carve out a spot for his gang in a city with the highest Cape population. Cars bisected by his breaker state claws, buildings destroyed, people dead in gruesome ways, and the testimony of a former PRT agent who Gargan had tortured for information. Thankfully, no images of any of the bodies. I didn't want to see what someone whose torso had been squished between breaker claws looked like. I'd seen enough to know that I wasn't going to be able to do nothing. I still hoped Carradine was wrong. I hated the idea of the heroes just waiting for Scorpion to strike at Fisk. I couldn't dismiss the logic of it though now that I had a better idea of what Gargan was. It was smarter to let Scorpion take out Fisk, keep an eye on the mob boss, and after Gargan tired himself out and started letting himself out of breaker form, you could containment foam him. But how many people were you risking there? Wilson Fisk has long held the claim that the gang of criminals hailing allegiance to the Kingpin were simply weaponizing a false narrative, hoisting up the rumored kingpin as a shadowy figure that they could rally behind to use the reputation that the media erroneously gave him. I doubted that as much as anyone else did, but I had no more proof than anyone else. The man employed a great deal of people in the city through as many legitimate means as his supposed illegal dealings. Scorpion killing him would take out a mob boss, but also one of the biggest employers in the city. He was just as likely to take innocent lives in that scenario than if he was ambushed before that point. I was taking Carradine too seriously, letting his thoughts and perspectives poison my own. I shouldn't operate on the assumption that the Protectorate is going to do nothing about Gargan. I still needed to look into it for myself as well, though. I'd start with the villain's lair. That house in the Bronx where they jumped him. Maybe the PRT left behind some clues, or I could get lucky and he went directly back to the same spot he'd hid last time. I don't think my luck would work like that, though. With my Spider-Man stuff packed into my backpack as usual, I went downstairs and told May that I still needed a breath of fresh air, so I'm gonna go on a walk. She seemed to accept that lie, telling me to be safe, which I only nodded to, since I didn't have the heart to lie out loud. I was headed towards the lair of a highly dangerous cape, so this was the opposite of safe. Doing my usual routine of getting to a safe place to suit up, I set out towards the location of Scorpion's lair. It was a good distance away from my home, which was a very good thing because I don't know how I'd feel if May were to be so close to such a dangerous person. It was also a good thing because it meant I had a decently long swing trip, time for my brute power to build up, so if Scorpion had come back, I would have some extra oomph and durability. Mac Gargan's address hadn't been hard to find and turned up quickly after enough snooping. The man's neighbors had been quick to talk to reporters and post online about how off the man had always seemed and what it was like living next to the infamous villain. I perched on a nearby apartment building, and I was truthfully taken aback by how mundane the villain's house was. Aside from a few signs of wear and tear, where the home could have used a better upkeep, it was the same as any other home on the street. I'd expected a real villain's lair to be something more foreboding. I thought the place would have some sort of presence to it. Instead, Mac's lair was a simple 2-story brick home, like a few others on this street, and the house had been painted white. There were a few spots where the paint was chipped away and you could see the red underneath. The normalcy was weirdly mind-boggling. Sitting on the street parked beside the house was a rusted-over pickup truck, which must have been Mac's. I really hoped not to be seen breaking in. Mac's neighbors had already proven to enjoy speaking to the media about this kind of stuff. I leapt down from the apartment, spending some of my brute charge to get down quickly without hurting myself. I walked over to the house and tried the door. It was locked. Scorpion was a top member of the Teeth. He bossed people around. Surely he'd send people to his home to get things in the past while he couldn't be there. He probably had a spare key sitting out somewhere. Hopefully the PRT hadn't already found and confiscated it during their own investigations. I bent down and lifted up the welcome mat, my prize glittering in the midday sun. I picked up the spare key and unlocked the front door to let myself in. Mac Gargan's living room was cramped. The house was relatively small, and so the living room had clearly been made to serve as much purpose as possible with the small space. Sitting on a couple shelves, Gargan had a few terrariums containing actual scorpions. The scorpion keeps pet scorpions? That would be kind of endearing if I hadn't read about him bisecting a man earlier, I quipped to myself. The contents of his end table were less funny. A drill and a roll of thread sat beside a handful of human molars. He must have been in the middle of crafting a project. Human teeth necklace. Fun. An armchair, a TV, a lawn of terrariums, and a love seat whose position in front of a scorpion terrarium would leave sitting guests with no legroom. Was his power more malleable than he let on? This scorpion obsession feels like if he had the power to take any particular shape, it would be that one. I looked at a pinboard on his wall that had a few specimens pinned to it. There were a few non-scorpions, a colorful moth, a black widow spider, and a beetle of some kind. Guy loves bugs. I creeped upstairs. Hopefully he had some papers or something in his room. I needed to find some kind of hint to where he'd be hiding. Where his living room had been crammed with furnishings and decor, his bedroom was practically Spartan. A dresser and an empty bed frame were all that was up here. If the PRT had snuck in and phoned him the moment he returned to his lair and plopped into bed, then they probably have ended up foaming him to the mattress. I could imagine it. Scorpion returning from whatever business he had with the Kingpin and ended up dragged out of his home glued to a mattress. I laughed at the thought. Of course he wanted to crush Fisk and his empire. That kind of humiliation he experienced destroyed villains. Gargan clearly preferred his living room. Everything he seemed to display openly there. Did he like company? Bring the other thief over to show them his bugs? I laughed to myself and started digging through his dresser. Here, Butcher, check this out. It's called the Pinky Yellow Moth. I cackled in a fit of hysterics. Mac's dresser wasn't too informative, mostly old clothes and rags. The bottom drawer was full of extra cloth that I guessed he used for sewing up his costume. I knew he had one, even if it never really got worn into fights. A lot of the teeth, especially the non-powered ones, wore red-hooded shawls in the winter. Did he make those? Was the scary murder monster man sewing and knitting shawls so his people didn't get cold? It bothered me that the man could show compassion for other murderers but so easily takes the lives of innocents. I could hear a car pull up to the house. Taking a peek outside, I saw two men in the front seat. The driver I didn't recognize for sure, but the guy in the passenger seat was one of the thief's capes. I wasn't sure which though, either Animus or Spree, probably. Three men, two with guns at their hips, and the third with a rifle strapped to his back, came sliding out of the car. They were coming here. Crap! Did Scorpion have a security camera somewhere? I should have been more careful. If they know I'm here, it won't be easy to sneak out if they're all on guard. I need to consider what I'm up against. The people with guns were the ones leaving the car, but the two in the front seat stayed there. One of them I knew was a cape, and if this was a situation where capes were sitting back to let their goons do their bidding, then they probably don't know a cape was in the building. But I can't rule out that they did and just thought I could be handled by normal guys. For now, I'd wait upstairs in Gargan's room. I could hear what I assumed to be the rifle guy. He'd been a bald-headed man who wore a crown of animal bone. I could see them from where I was now that they were at the door. I'd think he'd held an arm out or something because one of the other guys said, "Don't be spooked. PRT probably forgot to lock it back after the raid." I heard them moving into the house and their voices much louder. "Let's just get Mac's bugs and his threads so we can leave." Threads? They'd be coming up here for the cloth then. Crap, I needed to prepare to fight whoever comes up here without alerting anyone else. I zipped up onto the ceiling. Maybe I could drop down on them like I had with Dennis. After a minute, one of the men came up to the stairs. It was Rifle Guy, and he was talking to someone on the phone. "I'm getting it. Relax, Toomer. He's not about to suddenly freeze to death without a shawl. It's still April." What kind of a name was Toomer? I could hear a loud voice over the phone, but couldn't make out their words. "Yes, sir, and all that crap," said Rifle Guy. He hung up, and I swung down. There wouldn't be much opportunity for another surprise strike like this one if he fired off that rifle. To that end, I had to be brutal. I swung downward in an arc, fired a web at his face, and with whatever brute strength I'd built up from the swing here, I kicked him. The kick took him with me, and I completed the arc. His back slammed against the ceiling. I fired another blast of webs to stick him there. Thankfully, he wasn't hanging upside down, so despite some major discomfort later, he'd be fine. The noise of the strike was loud, but I was counting on it being the kind of thing you could rationalize as normal in an old house like this one. I grabbed a web cartridge from my pants pocket and reloaded my right web shooter. I needed to take these other two out, then sneak out the back door, maybe come back and follow them when they take the stuff to Scorpion. I began creeping down the stairs and would have met eyes with one of them if I hadn't been wearing a mask. They were both coming upstairs with their pistols drawn. It turned out criminals are suspicious of loud noises and will not just write them off. The one to my left was about to speak, but I couldn't let him. To be fair to myself, it was probably just going to be, "The fuck?" So I don't think I missed anything invaluable when I webbed his mouth and interrupted him. But I did sense pain from the other guy, and I dived to my left and fired a web at the man on the right's hand and yanked the gun out of his hand and webbed it onto the ceiling. My danger sense reminded me that the man whose mouth I'd webbed was still armed. Not much time to do something about it. I tackled him and pushed the gun downward so he fired into the stairs instead of into me. Crap, I'd been hoping to avoid gunfire. The man was strong, but the harder he pushed against me, the more I strained and the more strength I built up. I pried the man's gun arm down and pulled the firearm from his hand. There was no point in being silent anymore. What's with you guys and the guns? I thought the Thief's whole vibe was animalistic killers. I webbed the gun onto the ceiling with the other one. Shut up! The unwebbed guy yelled. He swung, and I messed up the dodge. The blow didn't hurt that much, though. My brute power was still building up as I fought. I'm serious, though. I hit Webmouth with a punch to his chest and webbed him to the stair railing. When's the last time you saw an animal use a Glock? I'm just saying, I think they're off theme for you guys. The other guy turned around to start running. I felt bad for doing it, but I still webbed his shoes to the ground. You should stick to knives and claws. It's way more on theme. Easier to dodge too, you know. I didn't expect an answer, but the goon whose mouth hadn't been webbed up asked, Don't you ever shut up? Not really, no. I walked past him. I needed to get out of here quickly. I was much too late, though. Good! A voice spoke behind me. It came from a man. He was wearing red pants and a black compression shirt. Adorning the shirt were an array of bones. Prominent femur bones acted as a frame of sorts on both sides of his chest, and hanging between them was a string with a series of teeth. It was strung in a way it looked like an infinity symbol. The man had razor-sharp blades on his shoulder and knee pads, as well as some on his wrist that protruded over his hands. Shaggy brown hair almost covered his face. A mask with some kind of sharpened bone layered over it covered his mouth. The parts of his face I could see were covered in a red war paint. Or, knowing the teeth, it could have been some kind of blood. He looked like a guy that if you got too close, you'd get hurt some way or another. Because I'm hoping to get some answers. He eyed my costume with a look of recognition. Spider Guy! Oh boy, what a treat! This was the man I recognized as a cape, though I still wasn't sure which one. I frowned behind my mask and did my best to keep my voice steady. You recognize me? I'm touched, but you're not who I'm looking for at the moment. I needed to focus on a much more violent Scorpion. As long as he was in the city, he was in active danger. Maybe I can get you my autograph later. I trailed off. You don't know who I am? I know you're fresh, but making moves on a group without knowing who their members are is just sloppy. I planned to let this conversation go on as long as he let it. I wasn't dumb enough to swing on another parahuman when I didn't even have a clue of what they did. I shook my head. I'm not moving on the teeth. Not yet, but eventually I probably would be butting heads with them as a whole. Just Scorpion. What's he planning? I know he's back in town. The cape cut me off. Hey, little Trigger, I get it. You're stepping up into the big leagues, and you want to make a big splash. I've been there. He held his hands out in my direction. It would have been a friendly gesture if he hadn't had blades on his wrist. Back in Boston, one of the earliest things I did was start beefing with Blasto. So this guy was Spree, the clone guy. I remembered hearing he had stuff in Boston before the butcher moved him and the rest of the teeth to New York full time. But listen, I'm gonna give you a chance here. Just walk out of here and we don't have to fight. You're new and I like your stuff. The videos are a riot, man. Just like that? I web up 3 of your guys and you just let me go? I asked. I couldn't believe he was being serious. He shrugged. They're still breathing? He asked and he sounded bored, like I was asking him why he was okay with me taking one of his french fries and not why he was trying to beat me to a pulp for beating up men who worked for him. Then yeah, just like that, I don't care. We've put them through way worse than this just for fun. They'll be fine. This whole interaction was feeling weird to me until I remembered something I'd heard from Death Killer of all people. I ran into him after he robbed a pizza place of one of their pizzas. At the time, I was still unaware of the responsibility my powers gave me. I accepted Death Killer's bribe of a pizza not to make him return the cash he'd stolen. We just kind of ate pizza and talked powers for a while on a bench in Central Park. Gangs and teams are crazy about tinkers, he'd said between a bite of pepperoni. Knew this guy who tinkered pipes and stuff? Water pipe shit. I'd eaten my own slice while he talked, and waited to speak until I swallowed. I generally avoided speaking with my mouth full when I could. Like sewer pipes? He shrugged. Yeah, kinda. Other stuff too, but always kinda in that zone. He just disappeared one day. Straight up got snatched. I remember thinking, oh shit. He nodded in whatever face I made. You've got other powers, so you'd be a lot harder to just grab, but you'll probably get a lot of weird, shady offers. I nodded. Yeah? He nodded back. Yeah. Tinkers are bullshit, man. Everyone wants one on their side. Fucking hell! Spree was trying to recruit me. Gross. You're trying to recruit me? Letting me off easy now so maybe I'll be more receptive in the future? Not happening, man. He looked offended. What's so wrong with that? We've got a good reputation these days. Only true in the sense that they weren't viewed as the failures they were before Scorpion had clawed them out of obscurity. They were still known murder hobos, just not as bad as many of the other murder hobos out there. A large figure emerged in the doorway behind Spree. The man looked almost like a bodybuilder. He wore a red tank top that showed off his muscle definition, and he wore dark, baggy pants. Unlike other members of the Teeth, he didn't have any of the weird bone decorations, though there was one article on this person that did creep me out, which was the full face-covering mask that was designed to look like a muscle. His blonde hair poked out from atop and around the mask. What's with all the chatter? Kid thinks he's gonna take on Scorpion, Spree explained. The new guy laughed at that. Yeah? He asked, looking me over. You're a tinker, right? You know. He trailed off. I think the way Spree looked at the other man told him the soft sell hadn't been working. Okay. It was like I could see the wheels in his head turning. I decided it wouldn't hurt to speak. I'll ask you since your friend didn't want to help me. Where's Scorpion? When's he hitting Fisk's people? The new guy stared at me stunned. You know about that? I glared at him, which was dumb because he couldn't see it behind my mask. Fisk sold him out, his men know payback's coming. It has them agitated and people are getting hurt. He and Spree laughed at that. The fuck does that have to do with you? Everything! I found myself yelling. The muscle-themed guy quirked an eyebrow at me. Spree stepped back. Tell me where he is, or I'm gonna make you tell me. I was losing my cool a bit now and decided to threaten. Unlike some people out there, the Teeth aren't rats. The muscle cape spoke. Spree, if he wants to play hero, let him. Spree looked at the muscle cape and nodded. Alright, Tumor, let's squish this bug. So this was Tumor. That name was so morbid. I took stock of my situation. I hesitated with Spree, tried the talking approach and was now face to face with two angry capes. Not exactly face to face though. I was standing on the bottom of the staircase and they were both in the doorway. I had a nice 10 to 15 feet between me and them that I might be able to use. Spree hunched over slightly like he was bracing himself for an impact. I went to fire a web at him to stop whatever he was doing with his power, but Spree was experienced in fights like this and my aim was poor. The duplicator went into a combat roll to dodge my webs and without missing a beat, when he came out, 3 clones flickered and burst out of him. He was bracing for the recoil, I realized. The clones fired out of him. One was moving too fast to stop and went flying into the wall. The second slammed into a terrarium, getting glass everywhere. And the third Spree double was able to get to his feet on the ground and charge at me. I was lucky that I was fighting him in such a cramped space. Under normal circumstances, the momentum would have just been enough to give the clones running starts, but here it meant they'd be smashing through the wall more than me. Before the first clone could get to me, Spree had fired more volleys in rapid succession. It took the man less than half a second to make them, and he wasn't stopping. What stunned me was that only every other group was being sent into the house. The other half of Spree's doubles started pummeling into Tumor. I watched as places where Spree's fist made contact would bloat and expand into harder, more durable muscle. It seemed like Tumor was some sort of crawler light. The villain's body became bloated and disfigured as the onslaught kept going, the transformed muscle exposing itself outwardly. Tumor's muscle mask fell off his head, and I could just see his real face now. He had a blonde goatee that I thought made him look like a douche. That would be interesting if there weren't 5 identical men running at me. I fired out webs to halt 2 of them. The clones seemed a bit less experienced in the real deal, and neither managed to dodge. I'm glad that worked, but in that time there were already another 4 making their way, with the 3 whose approach I hadn't stopped. There were too many to dodge in almost any direction, except up. I shot a web rope to the ceiling and yanked myself up, clinging onto it with 3 limbs and leaving one arm open to shoot another rope at one of the webbed-up sprees. I then yanked him towards the group that I avoided, and a number of them got caught up in the webbing of the one I had turned into an impromptu weapon, and they all got stuck together. It was weird that they weren't struggling, then I realized that some of them had gone completely unresponsive, laying limp. It seemed the clones didn't seem to function long, but in return, Spree could pump waves of them out in seconds. Speaking of which, my attention had been so focused on the one wave, I didn't notice till my danger sense pinged me of a clone being launched out of the main spree flying at me. I should have been treating him more like he had a gun, the way he could fire out his clones. I couldn't react in time, being upside down, and was tackled off the ceiling, falling hard onto the ground. Spree had produced even more waves in the time I was being tackled, and before I knew it, all the Spree clones dogpiled on me. Fists and spikes pummeled and stabbed at me as they piled on. I pushed against them, and my struggle was frustratingly futile, even with my brute power. I wasn't going to be able to build up enough strain to push the mountain of Sprees off me. I still tried, but the pain in my muscles was unbearable. I couldn't handle the pain it would take for my power to build up like it needed to. "Some hero," I heard Tumor speak, his voice deeper now, probably as a result of the way his body had grown. Tumor was right. Some hero I had turned out to be. I was stupid to think I had a chance against real villains. This wasn't a game where we both went home after, like with Deathkiller. Why'd he even try? I heard one of the Sprees speaking, the original one. The clones must have gone brain dead after a few seconds, because the first few seemed to have lost their ability to apply pressure, but it didn't change the weight or that there were still new Sprees joining the pile. My danger sense blared at me, and it was really bothering me when I knew very well already that I was in danger. The pain of being crushed was unbearable, but a thought reached my brain. Why had I tried? Because I could. I was doing this because someone should. I was fighting because I had powers and people were going to get hurt if I didn't. It didn't matter how many or how strong they were. I had a responsibility to the people around me to do this because I was the only one in the position to do it. I sure as hell couldn't let it end like this. I thought it would be easy, that I could just simply use my powers and win whatever battles came my way, but it wasn't that simple. I needed to do more than just have powers. I had to prove equal to the tasks ahead. Be worthy of powers I had, or else I didn't deserve them. Come on, Spider-Man, I thought. Come on, Spider-Man. I began to push. There must have been over 50 Sprees on top of me, maybe more, and the crushing weight upon me strained and scratched the floorboards beneath me. I started to push and strain, and my muscles ached more than they ever had before. The pain stung, and tears welled up in my eyes. I felt the pulling and tearing of my muscles as I pushed myself up into a standing position. This life wasn't going to be easy. Anyone could win a fight when the odds were easy, but the real battles in life were the ones that mattered. When the going got tough, when there seemed to be no chance of winning, that was when I needed to give it my all. My vision was going blurry. The strain I was putting myself through was absurd, but I just needed a little more. I pushed and sent the clones flying. I'd done it. I was free. Spree and Tumor stared at me stunned. At some point they'd written me off as dead under the mountain of meat. Because someone has to! I yelled. I didn't care if he'd forgotten the question. I fired my webs at Spree, and in surprise he failed to dodge. My aim had struck true, and my web stuck him onto the wall. Spree tried to duplicate himself, but the clone couldn't be fired out with the webbing around him. It seemed to flicker out and just be pushed back into him. Too focused on securing Spree, I didn't notice Tumor's attack. Fortunately for me, my danger sense did. I whipped around and saw the now rather big cape had crushed up one of the Spree clones into a bombardment of bone and flesh. Like some sort of siege weapon, he hurled the missilized Spree at me. I ducked under the debris, evading the first volley. Sorry, Spree. I apologized and web yanked up one of the Sprees who had only just seconds ago stopped breathing. With the Spree clone as a shield against Tumor's volleys, I made another charge at him. Bone thudded into and poked out of the clone as I ran for Tumor. Tumor stared at me as I charged him, with a strange, calculating expression. He hadn't gone for another attack, even though there were more clones on the ground around him. I dropped what remained of Spree's clone that I used as a shield at his feet, ready and raring to begin trading blows with him. Instead, the changer just held out his hands. "Stop!" he roared. "I've changed my mind." I leapt back to take a defensive position. I frowned behind my mask. "What do you mean?" His hands were raised up in the air like he was being held up by a cop and not a teenage vigilante. "I'll tell you about Scorpion." I eyed him suspiciously. Was this a trap? I glanced at Spree on the wall. If Tumor really was about to sell out his teammate, Spree didn't seem to mind. I'd gotten the impression from snooping through the house that Scorpion had a great deal of affection for his gang. Maybe that affection wasn't a shared one. "You'll tell me where he is?" I asked. "I can't do that. He's with the Butcher. But I can tell you where and when he's gonna strike." I stared at him, then tilted my head to look at Spree. "You're okay with this? Tumor just telling me this?" Sulking in the web, Spree seemed like he'd be crossing his arms if they were free. "Leave me out of that, man! I can't do shit to either of them. If Tumor wants to start something with Scorpion, that's all him, not me." Fair enough. Tumor spoke up. "If you're done asking for his opinion, I was giving you what you came here for." Yeah, I thought, he's a douche. "The amethyst rose sometime after 10. He didn't mention a date. "Tonight?" Tumor frowned. I wondered if he was reconsidering telling me anything. "Yes, tonight, Webs for Brains. Do you think he's gonna wait any longer?" Of course it had to not only be on the same day I've been running myself ragged, but late on a school night too. No, I guess not. Could I just leave? Should I? Before I decided that, I needed to know why. I got another look like I was stupid. "Because I want to move up, and I never will with Gargan around, so he needs to go, and I think maybe you've got a chance." Tumor and Spree were bad people. I knew Spree was a killer from the bones on his costume. The Teeth typically implemented parts of their victims into their costumes as trophies, but what about Tumor? He hadn't had any bones on his costume. I knew in order to join you had to shed innocent blood, so he must have killed at least one person, but had he not killed after that? It dawned on me that I was deliberating over letting actual killers off scot-free. I couldn't do that. I didn't have much brute strength left. It had taken almost all of it I built up with the strain to get the bodies off of me. I did, however, have a good bit of webs left, if I could just... As Tumor walked over to perhaps try yanking Spree off the wall, I adjusted my web nozzles on the web shooters so I could fire off all my remaining web fluid. I pulled on the last tiny bit of brute strength to shove the bulked-up changer against the wall and sprayed out a barrage of web fluid that looked more like I encased him in white containment foam. "The fuck, man?" Spree was the one to yell out. Well, Tumor also yelled, but I couldn't hear him under the mountain of webs. "He told you what you wanted." "You're murderers. I can't just walk away." Spree looked offended. Not at being called a murderer, and more, I think, that I had such a problem with it. "Just hang tight until somebody comes to get you guys, okay?" He looked pissed, but I didn't care too much about how he felt. He had tried to kill me back there, after all. I walked out of the door of Gargan's house and realized I had no webs left to swing home with. Ugh, I had to take the bus. I pulled out my phone and called the PRT hotline number. "This is the Parahuman Response Team. This is Hugh speaking. What's the subject of your emergency today?" I didn't want to say beat up. It sounded too violent and full of myself. I had barely gotten out of there alive, and it was only thanks to my webs that I was here to make this call. "Just if I had a fight with the Teeth, and I've got them webbed up, but someone needs to come get them." I could hear Hugh on the other line frantically trying to write something down. "Who is this? What do you mean by webbed up?" I didn't want to spend all day on the phone with him or hear him try to pitch me the wards. "Spider-Man? The webs are kind of like containment foam. It dissolves after an hour and a half. There's a couple of non-powered guys upstairs. They should be fine, but try to get them down soon." I told him the address. "Were there capes there, Spider-Man?" "Yeah," I told him. "2. Spree and this guy called Tumor." There was a pause on the phone. "You took them down by yourself? They're still webbed up, correct?" I hummed approvingly. Yup. I heard another pause and could hear him starting to go on a big spiel about a ward's membership and signing up as an independent partner of the PRT. I didn't listen, though. I didn't have time to. I'm sorry, but I've got to get off here. I hung up. After a bus ride home, I had another 6 hours or so before 10, which left me some time to tinker. I changed out of my very ruined costume and snuck back into my room. I walked out of my room to check on May before I shut myself in to tinker. She looked up at me with her eyes widened in horror. "Peter, what happened to your face?" I glanced down at my reflection in the sleek metal countertops of our kitchen. I healed a bit faster than normal people. Some days this effect was stronger and other days it was weaker. It turned out today was a weaker day because I still had a cut on my cheek from one of Spree's arm blades. I'm sure I also had a bunch of bruises, but thankfully May couldn't see those. "Aunt May, I'm fine, so calm down, alright?" She shook her head. "My nephew has a gash on his cheek. That's not fine." May insisted I let her clean and bandage the cut while I explained to her how I got it. I came up with a lie close enough to the truth. There was someone in trouble and I came over to help. Then I got caught up in it and tripped and split my cheek open on the sidewalk. May told me to be more careful in the future. I promised her I would and ran upstairs to tinker so that I could keep that promise. My suit in its current state was totaled, but the harness was fully salvageable. The web shooters could be slimmed down some if I used a new design I've been thinking of for my suit. I also had a firm idea of what I could make based on Deathkiller's power, and some ideas on how I might be able to use it against Scorpion's scales. May had gifted me some of Ben's clothes from his closet. An old blue jumpsuit sat out on my bed. It was one he had liked to wear for work. I needed a new style for a while, so it was probably for the best that my suit was tattered. I gave Scorpion some crap in my head for all the red cloth in his drawers, but I actually had a bunch of my own in my bottom drawer as well. I'm kind of a hypocrite, but mine isn't for knitting shawls for killers. Mine was for knitting killers' shawls. It was this silly tradition I'd started with May when she taught me how to sew and knit. This was back when I was around 10 and I'd been stumped at what to do for May's birthday that year. Ben suggested that I ask her to teach me to sew. She did, and when I presented her my first scarf, she said, "The best gift was getting to spend all this time with you." So every year, I knit her something. It meant I had a lot of extra cloth to work with. My design in mind, I was ready to start sewing. Before I did though, I logged onto PHO and downloaded all the videos I had with Deathkiller and his power. I let my Tinker Power take the reins as I coded a quick program to analyze footage to see what data I could get from the footage and hopefully make something usable. With that going, I started sewing. I was going for something more professional for this, and much fancier suit than what I wore before. If I had to put effort in, I could have made something nice from the start, but I hadn't wanted to. Spider-Man had just been a joke character to me. He didn't need a nice costume. I cannibalized the jumpsuit. I liked using something of Ben's for this, and May was never going to ask me about Ben's old jumpsuit. There wouldn't be any questions about what happened to it. Red and blue made for a rather nice color combination. The bulk of this new suit was nearly finished, so I moved on to the mask. I popped my lenses out of the old one and got to work tinkering something new out of them. I felt myself entering the fugue state I associated with tinkering as I molded the lenses into something that could respond to my facial expressions, letting me emote more with the mask. When that was done, I got to work with the harness. With this new suit, I'd installed wiring throughout in a webbing pattern to plug into my web shooters. I built a battery that I could charge with electricity and would hopefully last a while. The spider battery was the centerpiece of my new and improved harness. Finally, I got to work on the new web shooters. I phased into that tinker state of mind as I started laying down the groundwork for the web shooters. Something bothered me while I worked. With tinkering, sometimes my powers would take over where I lacked certain materials or physics got in the way and just kind of made it work. But sometimes it tried that when it wasn't needed. For some reason, I started zoning out using this aluminum mesh when the copper basis I designed with the concepts for my power would work just as well as whatever nonsense I was fiddling with. My power kicked out, and I felt a bit of whiplash as I pulled out of the zone and had to readjust what I was doing. "Be gentler about that," I said to my powers. I knew they weren't alive or anything like that, just my subconscious driving otherworldly powers, but it was funny to personify it. I can figure some stuff out on my own. We don't always have to jump to whatever weird reality warping we do sometimes. I finished with the base and calibrated the new web shooters. These ones would need the extra power granted by my battery. With the program done, I could start on my secret weapon against Gargan. Hopefully, it would give me the edge I needed to get through his breaker form. I only had 3 hours to tinker and hopefully pull this off.